Opening credits. Lucky Vampire. Paranormal Vampire Romance Short Story. By Selena Coffey. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Chapter 1. Sadie Evans removed the offending dress, the crinoline and corset that gave her the required shape to wear a 19th-century dress, and threw them in the fireplace. She was never going to wear such cloying and restrictive garb ever again. No, from now on she was going to wear pants and shorts, and the kind of flowing dresses she'd seen women wearing in the magazine the maid accidentally left behind. She hadn't known women wore such things, but now she did, and now that she was free, she was going to wear whatever she chose and go wherever she wanted to. She was free at last, and nobody could stop her. Looking at her
censored
form, she knew her hazel eyes and long blonde hair would be pleasing to most people. Most of the models in the magazine had been blonde after all, and she was slim, with a pert little nose that Adam Mayhew wrote sonnets about. Sighing, she picked up the pile of clothes she'd had the maid order through something the woman called a computer, and tried on each item, loving the way the clothes fit and draped over her full
censored
her hips, revealing far more than she'd ever been allowed to before Adam was killed by a vampire hunter. Adam turned Sadie into a vampire 128 years before, when she was 22 years old. He kept her locked away from sunlight, people, and the world since that day. He found her in Louisiana, at the end of the Civil War, the war between the states that had left the South and Louisiana in ruins. Sadie remembered how her daddy had cried when the war ended, certain that the family was now ruined as the Yankees and the carpetbaggers rolled in to take over land for no more than the back taxes the landowners owed to the United States government and failed to pay during the war. Such people targeted Sadie's family until Adam came along. He swore to Sadie and her family that their money problems would be over now that the Confederate dollar had no value. All they had to do was say goodbye to Sadie forever. Sadie and her family agreed, none of them knowing the true cost she would have to pay, and Sadie had never heard from them or about them again. That is, until Adam was staked. Much as her family was kept away, Sadie was not allowed to go around other people. Adam restricted entrance into their house in England, and most people didn't even know she existed. Nobody in the village knew, nor did anybody back home know she was still amongst the living. Well, the unliving, she thought to herself as she wandered over to the window that revealed it had grown light outside at last. Sadie could go out in the daylight, as long as she was covered, and often sat in the window seat looking out at the world she could not visit. In the beginning, blood donors came to the house, though not knowing why they were there. He allowed Sadie to drink her fill. They were then drugged and sent away, left to think it all a dream. In later years, after blood donation was developed and perfected, bags of blood were delivered to the house under the guise of running biological tests for studies he would sometimes publish under a variety of names. Sadie wasn't allowed to know about the increase in technology, restricted to only one wing of the house that was not updated to have electricity. She had yet to see these things people called television or computer. She had no idea what a mobile phone was, or even a curling iron for that matter, though she'd read about them in that magazine she'd found. She hadn't known women could vote or own property, and she had no idea what these car things were for. A week after Adam's demise, his lawyers contacted her. Men came to the house to let her know about the arrangements that Adam made for her. She thought Adam was on a business trip, and was surprised by the news that Adam was dead, though she wasn't sure how she felt overall about the man's death. He held her captive for 128 years after all. It had been 2 days since the men left her, and now she was starting to roam the house, discovering things she'd always wondered about as she gazed out of her windows, such as how the entire house would be so lit up at night when her candles barely made a glow in the glass of her own windows. Seeing the conditions she was living in, and her lack of knowledge about modern life, the men had no idea how to deal with Sadie at first. The astonished men began by ordering electricity installation services, and then the search for a personal assistant. The chosen candidate would be given a story that Sadie had amnesia and had forgotten most aspects of modern society. Sadie began to explore the house now that she knew she was free. It was all so strange. The appliances, some kind of hard but smooth material that made up most of the boxes with glass fronts that she'd found, intimidated her. She returned to her own wing when her parcel had arrived to try to process what she'd discovered. Putting on a pair of denim trousers, a dark blue silk blouse, and some delicate slippers in blue leather that she absolutely adored, Sadie walked back out of her room, determined to discover the world she did not know about. Surely, logic would get her somewhere, she thought, as she walked into a room filled with the boxes made from that strange material. Going to one, she saw that folded up to make one piece. Curious, she pulled it apart to see what it did, and was surprised when pictures appeared on the top part. The bottom was filled with buttons that had numbers and letters on them. She wasn't sure how to make anything work, but she slid her hand around the contraption and over a strange part with buttons below the symbols, and saw that a white arrow moved when she slid her finger over it. Aha! Step 1, she said out loud. Studying the screen, she saw that one of the white boxes said, "Search for people, places, or things," and moved the arrow up to that, but she could not do anything with the symbols on the buttons. Going from the knowledge that moving her finger over that area caused the arrow to move, she thought the buttons there must do something as well, so she clicked the one on the left first. Hitting the symbols again, she saw words start to form and thought she must have figured this part out as well. She typed in her own name, then clicked the button the right of the box that said search. She saw pictures, color pictures that she'd never seen before, filling the screen. It appeared that there were many women with her name, and one appeared to be a singer. How very odd, she thought. Deciding to go in another direction, she typed in New Orleans, Louisiana. Now she saw pictures of strange structures that looked like black roads, and a round domed structure lit up with an array of colored lights. Those are some very strange candles. I wonder how they created that, Sadie wondered. She had so much to learn. She hoped the lawyers found her an assistant soon because she wanted to know what was out there. She wanted to live, after 128 years of being kept hidden away. Looking around the room, she made sure it was empty before typing in the next few words, her cheeks reddening as she typed. She'd read the words in that magazine, and had been curious about them. Adam.
Censored.
What she read, so she'd never read the word before, but these female writers knew what it was and she wanted to know too. It must be thrilling because the word appeared in bold letters, repeated often and used in different ways. She also knew it must be naughty because the word bed kept being used too. Oh my! She cried as she saw images filling her screen and descriptions of things she didn't even know could be done. Sadie looked through the results for an hour, learning far more about the world of
censored
in those few minutes than she had in her entire lifetime. Fanning her flaming face, Sadie pushed the top of the contraption down and went to see if she could figure out the flat rectangle box on the wall. Studying the surface rewarded Sadie with something that looked like a button. Poking it, she wasn't surprised when people appeared in the box, talking and seeming to be alive, much like the people in the other box from the things called videos. She'd been surprised about those too, that people could have their images captured and replayed over and over again within the boxes like that. She wasn't sure why some of them wanted to be recorded doing the things they were doing, but it was a new world for her. Perhaps things were not just a little bit different than from her time, but a whole lot different. Sighing, she sat down to watch what the woman in the box called the news this hour. She saw people fighting in the streets, people going to jail, war taking place somewhere, babies being neglected, and apparently America had a black president. Oh my, Papa would surely be spinning in his grave, she thought, as she giggled and brushed away the tears that had initially fallen when the lady started talking. She was pleased that the world had changed in that regard at least. Hearing a knock on the front door of the country estate house, Sadie walked through to find a pile of mail slipped through the mail slot. She picked it up, noticing two of the envelopes addressed to her. One was from the lawyers here, England, and one was from America. She opened the one from the lawyer first. The letter informed her that the lawyers had found her an assistant, someone of her persuasion as they put it, so she assumed they meant a vampire, and she had more money than she'd ever know what to do with, billions of pounds. They were sending her identity cards, her birth certificate, and other papers with the assistant. Apparently, they were items she needed to travel and make purchases. Now she owned homes throughout the world, homes she could visit anytime. They also informed her they'd take care of the estate and the financial aspect for her if she so chose. She thought that might be best until she learned about such things for herself, but reminded herself to have her assistant to request monthly reports from them. She then turned to the second letter, much thicker and with a much different stamp than the one from the United Kingdom. This letter informed Sadie that she also had a lawyer in Louisiana, and that the family that had originally owned the home had all died out, but that Adam had purchased the house from them in 1865. This must be her old home then. The news that she had no distant relatives to contact saddened Sadie, but she was overjoyed that the house was still in its original state. Why, she could go home if she wanted to. Nothing would have changed in all the time she was away, well, nothing that her family hadn't changed at least. Thinking about it, as she wandered back into the room with the boxes of knowledge, she turned back around as another knock sounded on the door. Wondering if she had more mail, Sadie stood staring expectantly at the mail slot. When a second knock came, she assumed someone was actually at the door and opened it. A woman, covered head to toe, stood there smiling with the brightest red lips she'd ever seen. She guessed it must be some of the lipstick she'd seen in the magazine, but wasn't sure. People did strange things to their bodies now, after all. Sadie had seen some tattoos when she looked at that box earlier. "Hello?" she asked, uncertain who could be visiting her. "Hiya, I'm Amber. Your lawyer sent me around to give you a hand." The woman held her hand out then. Sadie took it, unsure of what she was supposed to do with it. The woman shook it, then released Sadie's hand. "Ah, that was it then, I have that down now," she thought. "Hello, I'm Sadie. It's a pleasure to meet you. Won't you come in?" Stepping back and pushing the door open further, Sadie invited Amber into her home. Her home, she liked the sound of that. What a beautiful home. Amber tilted her head and spun around, looking at the high ceilings and the paintings on the walls. "This is just stunning." "Thank you, would you like something to drink?" "I'm not sure what we have, but I'm sure I could find you some water if nothing else." Sadie spoke to the woman, pleased that she enjoyed the house. "Oh, that's my job, Sadie, not yours. Let's have a seat, and we'll start getting to know each other, all right?" "That sounds like a good idea to me. I've been so lost and alone for days now. There hasn't been anybody to talk to except the maid when she comes in. She's not been by for a couple of days now, so it's been very lonely here." "Well, I'll be staying here with you so you don't have to worry about that anymore." Amber took off her wrappings, sunglasses, and hat, and laid them on the couch beside her. Amber was quite stunning herself, black hair and brown eyes that spoke of exotic places mixing with a warm, inviting smile that simply put Sadie at ease immediately once she could see the woman's face. "So you're a vampire as well? The lawyers told me they were going to hire someone out of the loop, but then sent a letter to inform me they'd hired you, well, someone anyway. I assume that's you, as I can sense you aren't one of the living." "Yes, I am. I'm part of a new group, helping newly released vampires find their footing, though I don't believe we've had any that were quite as sheltered as you have been so far. We heard about Adam, and made inquiries about any children he may have created. We learned about you, so here I am. Your lawyers can confirm any questions you may have, and these documents are yours as well. Some of those include documentation from my organization that outlines what we agents can and can't do, what we're here for, and where you can go if you have any further questions." "Oh, thank you," Sadie said as she took the papers, looking through them quickly. She saw one was a passport and had an idea. "I suppose I only have one burning question at the moment? Do you have a passport, and are you willing to travel?" Sadie asked with a huge smile. 2 weeks later, Sadie and Amber outstepped into the overwhelmingly humid heat of July in New Orleans, Louisiana. She could swear her eyeballs fogged up as soon as she was outside. Judging from the clouds overhead, it was going to storm as well. It was going to be tough to stay covered up in this part of the world, but Sadie was willing to put up with most things if it got her out into the fresh air. Besides, she was a vampire. It wasn't as if she was going to die from heat exhaustion or anything now, was it? Stepping off the privately chartered plane, Sadie thought about the steps she'd had to take to finally land on her home soil. She learned far more about computers and television from Amber, and far more from her time on the internet. The world was a completely different place, and she missed quite a lot over the last 128 years. Adam kept her locked away from far too much, hoping to keep his little docile vampire pure and sweet, unlike some of the more jaded of their race. Amber enlightened her with the use of private websites for vampires, and the things Sadie had learned there shocked her to the core. She could never be the kind of vampire that enjoyed torturing humans or seeing them as weak characters, so she quickly left those sites, not returning to them. A car waited for them with very dark-tinted windows, and Sadie sighed with relief. She loved the sun and being in it, but sometimes the light was just far too powerful for her eyes. Sliding into her seat, she asked Amber what was next. "Well, we're going to head over to your house to see what's going on there. If it's suitable, we'll stay there. If not, I've booked rooms in the French Quarter. It should be all right though. Adam has been paying a caretaker, and I had a contractor come out and have a look at it. They said repairs were needed, but nothing too major." They drove out of New Orleans, over the Bonnet Carré spillway, and over a huge bridge unlike any Sadie had ever seen before. The bridge just kept rising high into the sky and then plunged down again. She was ever so glad when they got to the end of it. Her home had changed completely, and where there used to only be dirt tracks and carriages, cars and trucks drove over tarmac and cement. She had a very hard time understanding how all of these contraptions worked, and she was terrified of flying, worried the plane would stop working at any minute, but it hadn't. The speed of the movement of people and goods astounded her, and she felt her head swimming trying to take it all in. She felt like a bird freed from its cage but with its wings clipped, unable to fly free yet. There was still so much to learn, and she wasn't sure she'd ever completely get used to it. Sighing, she turned to watch as the car turned left, leading into a drive lined with live oak trees. She was home finally. River Run Plantation was in view, and her excitement grew when she saw the pink granite walls. She was home at last, and not much had changed. Taking in a deep breath, she tried not to shriek from excitement. Her happiness was shortly tinged with sadness as she realized that her family was not there to greet her, but still, she knew she was home, and that mattered to her more than anything did just now. Chapter 2. Sadie gasped as the nearly nude man walked into her parlor and bellowed out for Ms. Evans. Bellowed. The man actually bellowed in her home. Why, he wasn't even wearing a shirt. He was deeply tanned, and from the line around his belt, she knew that tan went much further than just his hips. He had dark black hair, thick and longish so that it curled around his face, and dark chocolatey brown eyes. He was handsome in that alpha male, hard as nails kind of way that women seemed to fall for now, from what she read in the books she'd been reading since she'd figured out how to use e-readers. Strong, tall, and sexy, the man walked into the house with work boot-covered feet, tracking dirt in with every footstep. "Excuse me, sir, could you kindly please stop bellowing like a wounded pig in my home? I'm Sadie Evans, what can I do for you?" Sadie asked, knowing she sounded like a prig, but not being able to stop herself. She knew this was a different time, and that relations between men and women were different, but she'd had very little interactions with anyone other than Amber, especially not anyone half
censored.
"Ah, well, excuse me, ma'am, but I'm the contractor Seth Cheddatal, here to clear your pipes for you," he said with a cheeky grin. Sadie knew from the way he said it, and the gleam in his eyes, that what he'd said had some kind of dirty undertone to it, but she wasn't sure what clear your pipes meant. "Well, that's wonderful. What do you need from me?" "Amber should be taking care of everything." "Yes, ma'am. Normally I would contact Amber, but she's not here right now, and I can't reach her on her phone. I need to know what you want me to replace these old sewer pipes with. The whole system has to be updated, and I need to order the pipes before we start tearing the old ones up." Sadie's eyes had started to wander over the man's perfect skin as he spoke, noting that his
censored
hair only covered the upper portion of his
censored,
the rest as smooth as silk. She wondered what all of that skin felt like, what it would taste like. Shaking herself, she realized she'd been caught staring when the man winked at her, letting her know he'd seen where her eyes had finally come to rest. She was confused again. Adam had told her vampires didn't have the same urges as humans, but she wasn't looking at this man as a blood donor. She wanted the things she'd read about, the things she'd seen in movies from him. Licking her lips and blushing, she looked away as he repeated his request. "All right, the pipes. Just use whatever is best for the job. I don't want to have to replace them again for a long time, so use whatever is durable and effective. I know this is a throwaway society, but I'm not like that. I want things that will last, so use those materials," she said innocently and without guile. "Oh, I think I can give you the best, the most long-lasting pipes you've ever seen, Cher. Just tell me when," he said with a smirk. "Thank you," Sadie replied, glaring at him. "I'm sure you'll do a fine job." She made a note to tell Amber to replace him as soon as she got back. She used a dismissive tone when she spoke, hoping he'd take the hint and go back to work. Instead, he just stood there, the smirk growing deeper. "Is there anything else?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. "No, I just wanted to say thank you for hiring my company. I have a lot of men with families, depending on the paycheck I provide them, so I do appreciate the business." She thought, he must have heard my thoughts. She considered his response, then went back to her desk, thinking it might be best to just stay far away from him and let him carry on with his job. "You're quite welcome. I'll let you get back to work now." "Have a nice day, ma'am," Seth said as he sauntered out the door, the smirk never leaving his face. Sadie went to her computer and pulled up the file Amber had sent her on Seth Cheddatal. 28 years old, never married, 2 tours of duty in the American Army, no children, successfully operating his business for 4 years now. Seth was the man Amber had picked to make all the repairs needed in her home. He was going to be here for at least a month, so Sadie figured it was time to get her southern charm out and polish it up. The man rubbed her entirely the wrong way, but something about the way his jeans hung low on his hips that made her want to keep him around. She'd give him a chance and see what happened. Maybe she could loosen up a little and enjoy herself for once, she thought as she replayed her view of his
Censored.
in her mind once more. Maybe so. An hour later, Sadie was hardly surprised when she heard Seth yet again bellowing in her hallway. This time she was upstairs, trying to decide what to do with the drapes, and ran down the stairs to hush him. "Really, Seth, I do think you could stop bellowing out like that." "Sorry, Cher, I'll try to remember not to do that. I don't know how else to get your attention though." "Well, I apologize as well. We seem to have started on a bad note, so please do excuse me. What can I help you with?" "I need to shut the water off for a little while, an hour or so. I just wanted to let you know." "Thank you for letting me know, Seth. I was going to wash some clothes, but that will have to wait, I guess. Please do let me know when you're through though, won't you?" "I will. See you later." He smiled, then walked away, letting her get back to deciding about the drapes, but instead she walked to the window and looked out, watching Seth as he worked with his men. The powerful play of his muscles as he moved was enthralling, and she didn't stop staring until he looked up, catching her in the window. He waved and she stepped away from the window quickly, wondering about far more than the drapes now. A few weeks later, and Sadie was alone in the house when the phone rang. Amber had gone back to England to sort some business for Sadie there, and there was a hurricane on the way. She'd closed all of the shutters she could reach, but some were well out of her reach. She prepared an emergency kit and set up a safe place in an upstairs room with only one window. All of the other rooms had many more windows, so this was the best she could do. She'd seen the past devastation of other hurricanes and knew she needed to be high off the ground and prepared in case she couldn't leave the house for a while. She'd ordered non-perishable groceries to be brought to the house and was as ready as she could be, but she was still alone and that bothered her. Looking at the caller ID, she saw that it was Seth calling. Clicking the button, she held the phone to her ear, almost whispering as she said hello. She could hear the wind raging outside and was frightened. She didn't like the sound of it at all. "Hey Cher, you okay?" Seth asked. Over the last couple of weeks they'd grown closer, spending more time together, the heat building between them with each new meeting. Sadie was considering asking him to dinner, but hadn't built up enough courage to yet. Dating while you were a vampire could be tough. Honestly, I'm terrified out of my mind at the moment. I've never been through one of these on my own, though I know River Run can withstand it. It's my nerves I'm most worried about. She blurted out, the pace of her words revealing her fright. Have you closed all the shutters yet? Seth asked in his deep, sultry voice. She loved his voice, his accent, so familiar yet still different from what she was used to hearing from people in the area. 100 years did strange things to accents sometimes. Ahem, well no, some of them are too high for me to reach, and I can't close them from the inside it seems. So the ones upstairs here are all open. I'll be right over then, and we'll have you fixed up in no time. Just keep an eye out for me. It started raining on this side of the parish, so I may have to make a run for the house. Of course that big old porch will be a nice spot to dry off, if you left me out in the rain. He laughed as he spoke. Oh, I'd never do such a thing to anybody. Well, most people anyway. Just a few perhaps? She giggled and told him bye, as he was leaving his house now. She knew it would take a few minutes for him to get here, so she ran to her room to change into some much tighter jeans, a form-fitting blouse, and put some white trainers on in case she had to go outside as well. She also braided her hair, which was just as long as it had always been. She just could bring herself to cut it even in this heat, and spent most of her time with it braided down her back. Her hair was just one part of her past that she couldn't let go of yet. Maybe later, but not yet, especially not with her parents' portraits staring down at her from the parlor every day. They constantly reminded her that a woman's glory was her hair. Looking at herself in the mirror, she knew she looked nice but not overdressed. There was a hurricane going on, for heaven's sake. She didn't want to get all dressed up in the middle of this. No, sensible but sexy, that's how she looked. She snickered as she looked at herself, thinking about all the nonsense she'd seen in movies about vampires. Why on earth wouldn't we be able to see our reflections, she thought, as she turned from the mirror. She also loved garlic and eating, though it was just a function now, a pleasure to eat, not something she required. She needed blood to live, not food, but she could eat. Garlic was actually one of her favorites. Sadie heard a vehicle outside and ran to the front door to see Seth making a run for her house. The rain had arrived with him, and it was pouring down in buckets. Sadie let him in, quickly closing the door against the driving rain. The sounds of the storm dampened as she closed the door, but the sound still penetrated, filling Sadie with a sense of dread. It's only going to get worse. Let's get those windows shuttered before I have to replace those next week as well. Seth ran through the house, using a special lever she didn't know about to get them to close. The house turned very dark as he closed the shutters, no light penetrating the protective devices at all. Sadie closed the doors to those rooms, turning the hallway lights on as she went through to the kitchen. Seth followed behind her, drying himself off with a towel as he walked. He placed the towel on the back of a chair and turned to Sadie as she started to speak. Do you want something to eat? I have a feeling the power is going to go out, so we might as well get rid of what's in there now. Let me have a look in there, see what we can fix up. He pulled out a few things and set about cutting up sausages and onions. Before long, the kitchen smelled glorious, and Sadie couldn't wait to taste what he was preparing. It smelled familiar, but it had been something she ate as a child, she knew that much. She wasn't sure, but she knew as he mixed up a batter that he was making cornbread to go with it. Finally he set a dish before her, filled with rice, beans, sausage, and a plate of cornbread on the side. Red beans and rice. The meal had been one of her favorites as a child, but her mother wouldn't let her eat it as she grew older, considering it slave food or something eaten only children and the poor. She ate the meal, memories of her childhood flooding back into her brain with each bite. She wiped a stray tear away, missing her family, thinking of how wrong they'd all been to own other people, of things she'd seen during the war that were better left unremembered. It had been a horrible time, but it was all she had known then. Now she knew better, and she could make better choices. She was actually allowed to make choices now, which was something she hadn't really been able to do in her proper time. Sadie jumped as she heard something thump against the house, her attention diverted from her reverie. That's only going to get worse as the bands move in over land. We're supposed to get some very high wind tonight, so, as Seth spoke, the power went out. Seth reached into his pocket, then turned on the flashlight app on his smartphone, bringing some light to the now pitch-dark home. I'm guessing that's going to last for a while too. You done eating? Yes, I think I am. Let's put these dishes away, then we'll go upstairs to the room I prepared if you want to stay. Unless you'd rather go home before it gets too much worse. Sadie replied, hoping he'd stay. Oh, I'm not going out in this. I'd be more likely to get arrested for being out than I would be likely to make it home. I'll stay here if you don't mind. I think we could both use the company on a night like this. That's just fine with me, Seth. I hope you like books, because that looks like the only entertainment we're going to have for a while. She walked back through the house, up the stairs, and to the room prepared as a shelter. There was a couch, 2 recliners, a television, a bed in the room, and 2 battery-powered lanterns, but not much else. She'd stacked books by the couch, not realizing that anyone would be here with her. She read quickly, an entire novel in less than an hour, so she'd brought a few in case she needed more to get her through. She'd have to remember to read at a slower pace, not vampire pace, since Seth was here. I brought a deck of cards if you know any card games. He pulled the cards out of his back pocket, waving them at her with a grin. Is this the part where you ask if I want to play strip poker? She asked with a dubious grin. Not at all. I am a gentleman in all respects. I'd never ask a lady to partake in such a game. What about women who aren't ladies then? They're different. I might ask them, he said with a laugh. I see. Well, I don't think it would be wise to play such a game tonight. What else do you have in mind? Sadie asked. Rummy, he asked. You're in luck. Amber and I have played that often. I think you're in for it now. She smirked as he shuffled the cards, then laid them out on the couch seat between them. The game helped her relax as the night wore on, but the wind raging and howling outside negated any relaxation after a while. Objects kept hitting the house, and she hoped the roof could withstand the beating it was taking. The wind just kept getting worse, and she started to get tense now, terrified of being stuck in one room again, locked away from the world. Everlasting life sounded like a good idea, until locked away from the world, only seeing the same person repeatedly. On a special occasion you might see 1 or 2 other people, but never for long, and it made for a bleak life. Sadie had often felt like one of those princesses locked in a tower, hidden from the world and bored to despair. She opened the collar of her blouse as she heard glass shattering downstairs. She knew that meant something had flown against and through the shutters. Sadie ran to the bed, feeling childish and silly but still wanting to hide from the storm. Seth followed her as she made mewling noises but didn't touch her. He slid over to her slowly, pulling her into his lap as she settled into his embrace. He didn't remember exactly what happened next, but he knew they both woke up to find most of the ceiling on top of them, the sun shining through the hole where the roof used to be, broken boards, tar paper, tree, and leaves obscuring the view. Crap, they were stuck. He couldn't move, and Sadie hadn't stirred at all. Chapter 3. Sadie? Wake up, Sadie. Come on now, Cher, you have to wake up. We have to see if we can get out of this mess. He gently shook Sadie until she moaned, trying to knock off whatever had her pinned down. Her eyes flew open, and she panicked as she realized something was definitely holding her down. Something hard and rough feeling. Looking around, she realized what had happened, and also realized that nobody was coming to save her. She squirmed, she tried to push, she tried to wiggle out from under the massive trunk and limbs, but she could not get out. She wasn't hurt, but she finally realized Seth was there and might be. She turned her head to him, trying to see if he was all right. Seth, are you all right? She asked, panicked even more now. I think one of the limbs has broken my leg. It hurts pretty badly, but that's all, Sadie. I'll live if we can get out from under here. Do you have your phone on you or anything? No, and even if I did, I can't reach it at the moment. What are we going to do, Seth? I'm not sure yet, Sadie, but we'll figure this out. Seth could move his right arm and started to feel around, trying to see if there was any place he could wiggle out of, under, anything to get them free. He felt something wet and looked down at his hand. OF Sadie, you're bleeding. In his own panic now he looked down and saw that one of the limbs, a small one, had impaled Sadie through the left side of her stomach, and blood was streaming from the wound. Sadie had never heard anyone openly use the F word before, and was more shocked by it than the tree limb impaling her. She heard it on videos and television, but never in person. She kind of liked it, but right, blood loss was never a good thing even for a vampire. Shit. Seth, how much blood are we talking here? Sadie whimpered. She now realized the exhaustion settling in wasn't just from a bad night. She was on the verge of bleeding out, and the only way to fix the problem was with fresh blood. She healed rapidly with fresh blood, but she couldn't get to her secret fridge full of plastic bags of blood. Judging from how wet I am, I'd say you should be dead now, Sadie. Seth said, concern evident in his voice. Seth, I have to tell you something, but then I have to ask you something. But it might just be easier to show you, so here goes. A moment of panic, thinking Seth would freak out, was nullified by her need for blood. Sadie made the muscles that extended her fangs move, and caused her eyes to turn red as they filled with blood. All right, you're a vampire. I thought something was strange about all of those clothes you wear when you go outside. This is Louisiana, after all. So we can fix this then, right? You just need my blood? Seth said, shock nowhere in sight. Sadie was floored. You aren't going to run away in fear or try to stake me? Sadie asked, confusion evident. Not at all, Cher, my brother's a werewolf. It makes sense, there are vampires in the world too. Here, let me see if I can wiggle up some, get near your mouth that way. Seth moved, crying out as the movement jolted his leg. That would definitely have to be fixed. Finally, Seth had inched up enough that Sadie could see his neck, could touch it with her lips, and though her thirst was great, she wanted to taste his skin more than she wanted to drink from him. She ran her
censored
over the vein throbbing in the side of his neck, and felt a thrill when he groaned. Sadie, drink darling, don't tease me. Seth growled, the sound thrilling her even more. Oh, to make him produce that sound again. If only she could move the things, she'd do it. Sadie allowed her fangs to slip into his skin, the penetration as smooth as silk, and clamped her lips down on his skin. As she sucked the blood into her mouth, up into her teeth, she felt her energy coming back, but she also felt her
censored
for Seth growing. The taste of his blood was intoxicating, spicy, and hot against her.
Censored.
Her energy was returning with each pump of his blood into her open mouth, and she felt the tree limb moving from her body, the jagged torn skin, muscle, and organs repairing as the blood worked its magic on her body. She slowed her drinking as she healed, not wanting to take more than she needed, and knew that in a moment she'd have them both free, as she would be able to move or break anything that held them down. She licked the wound again, not to tease him but to heal him, and allowed herself the momentary pleasure of breathing him in, her lips going up to nibble at his ear. Sadie, you have to stop. I can't touch you any more than I am, and what I want to do to you right now, after that, requires my hands. So you either have to stop that, or figure out how to get us out of here, because what blood I have left is not in my brain at the moment. Sadie moved her arms again, and the limbs pinning her down shattered like icicles that had begun melting. She managed to free herself, and then climbed off the bed to free Seth. The limbs holding him down were stronger, and there was more of the trunk holding him down. She was going to have to hold the tree up as Seth slid out, otherwise it would crush him. All right, when I say go, flip off of the bed quickly. Sadie gritted her teeth, snapping limbs as she held the tree up with the other hand. Seth quickly rolled out of the bed, screaming as his shattered leg hit the floor. Okay, we're taking you straight to the hospital now because that needs mending. Can you stand up? Sadie helped him to stand as he grinned down at her. He was well over 6 feet tall, so he could do that, she thought with a smile. Oh, you aren't carrying me, lady, strong as an ox or not, I'll hobble out of here on my own. Lead on, mademoiselle, I hear painkillers calling my name. At least the storm is over now, and the sun is out. We'll assess the damage tomorrow. Grab some things. You can stay at my house tonight until I can get my crew in to patch that hole, until we can fix it properly. Sadie grabbed some things and then helped Seth out to his vehicle. Knowing she was legal to drive didn't mean she knew how. Putting the key in, she drove very slowly, trying to get the feel of it all, following Seth's instructions once he'd figured out she had no clue what she was doing. "Turn here, that's the hospital," Seth said, gritting his teeth against the excruciating pain he now felt. He was quickly treated, despite the large number of people in the emergency department, and Sadie drove him back home because he was high as a kite on the medicine they'd given him. Sadie insisted she was fine, and avoided being examined herself, thankfully, and held his hand as they set the bone, then plastered it up. Getting him back into his house was no easy task, but they managed, and Sadie soon had him settled in his bed, just outside of New Orleans, in a nice, well-kept home. He obviously took care of what was his, even working the hours he did. She ordered some food from a takeaway menu, and settled down with him in the bed. Sadie felt like they'd been doing the same thing for an eternity, not as though this was the first time she'd ever been in a man's bedroom alone, much less with a man she wanted to do naughty things with. Sighing, she watched Seth as he slept, loving how relaxed his face was now. She slid a finger along his jaw, hoping he'd open those beautiful brown eyes up again, but also hoping he'd get the rest he needed. She thought about what he said, that his brother was a werewolf, and figured the brother must have been bitten. Usually all members of a family were werewolves. It didn't skip around like diabetes might or other genetic disorders. She also wondered how prevalent creatures like her were if Seth was this accepting. A far stranger world than she expected had been her reward for years of being locked away, and every day, the strangeness of it just intensified. Hearing the delivery boy ring the doorbell, Sadie ran to grab the food before they woke Seth up, then felt silly because she was going to have to wake him up to eat anyway. She noticed him stirring as she walked back into the room, and smiled at him as he opened his eyes. Is that food I smell?" he murmured through a sleep-thickened voice. "Yes, I ordered pretty much everything they had on the menu. I didn't know what you'd like. What do you want first?" Sadie asked, turning to him with a smile. She stopped as she saw the quilt sliding down his body, way down his body, to reveal every inch of him from his cast-covered leg up. Her mouth went dry as she stared at him, wanting to touch every inch of his tan brown skin. "I think I'd like you first, Sadie, if you don't mind. Can that be arranged? I want you over here, riding me, with all of that hair falling around us." "Yeah, that's what I'd like first, and I'm injured. You can't turn an injured man down now, can you, ma'am?" His smile was a little lopsided, and Sadie thought some of it must be from the drugs they'd given him, but if that's what the man wanted, that's what he'd get. She had let go of her inhibitions, she'd let go of her prudishness over the last few weeks, and she knew this is what she wanted. A man that could take control, but could let his woman control also, a man that knew what he wanted and wasn't afraid to ask for it, but one that was gentle and respectful. She wanted Seth, and she was going to have him. Slipping out of the nightgown she'd changed into after her shower, Sadie walked over to Seth, letting her hands slide up his muscular thigh, over his hip, up his waist, and to his thickly muscled.
Censored.
She knew that she was going to have to do the work because the man couldn't stand at the moment, so she thought of some of the things she'd seen in videos she'd watched on her own late at night.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
Chapter 4. Sadie heard Seth thumping around with his cast in the hallway, heading to her office upstairs, and looked at him with a smile. "What's up, darling?" she asked, holding her face up for the
censored
she expected. "We found something in the walls I think you should see. I've sent the boys out for lunch because I wanted this to be private. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's got your name on it, and it's been there a long time. I didn't want too many questions being asked. I told them the woman in the portrait downstairs is your namesake. That's why you look so much like her and why you have her name. Either way, they might start asking questions, so I sent them out." "Oh, what is it then?" she asked, curious now. "Just come see babe," Seth said with a smile, turning on his crutches to walk out the door. It had been 3 weeks since the storm, and the men were finally installing new paneling in the damaged room. They repaired the roof, now they were repairing the walls and floors. She walked into the room, seeing that the wall had been moved out, and that there was actually a 3-foot gap between the actual wall and the false wall. Inside that space was a
censored,
with her name on it in yellow letters, a very dirty, dusty.
censored,
Sadie bent down in front of it, opening the clasp on the front to reveal the contents of the trunk. She saw papers, other boxes, and a letter with her name on it as well. Opening the letter, she discovered it was from Adam. He must have left it here long ago, but the words still meant the same thing. He hadn't wanted to reveal to her that the process that had made her a vampire could be reversed, not while he was living, but he hoped she'd one day find this.
censored,
Once he was gone, so that she could make that decision for herself. Inside were all of the things she needed to change back to a human being, or to prepare her own mate to become a vampire. Adam said he loved her his whole life, and that he regretted nothing about keeping her caged, but knew that she may resent him and want her freedom from being a vampire now. He had no idea how right he was, Sadie thought. "Seth," she said with a quavering voice, "this changes everything." "What do you mean, Sadie? What does it say?" Seth asked. "Well, do you want to be a vampire, my darling, or would you rather me be a human being again?" "But that's not possible, you can't just come back to life." "Adam says I can if I so chose, and this is the means to do it. I can also turn you, if you'd rather. It's a choice we have to make, darling. Maybe not right now, but at some point we have to decide what to do. I can't live like this forever, I know that much. I want a normal life, a life with little tiny Seths and little baby Sadies running around. A life where we can grow old together. I feel like I'm so much older than you, and I am really, but at other times I feel so naive. I just want to have a normal relationship with you, a normal lifetime, Seth. I'm 150 years old. I'm ancient. If I can go back to being human, without looking like I'm 150 years old, I'm willing to do it, darling, so that we can have a real life together. If that's what you want, babe, that's what you'll get. I don't want to be a vampire anyway. I've seen how being a werewolf has impacted my brother, and he loves his life, but he doesn't age and he has his own problems. How would we explain my not aging with my family around? I'd have to abandon them all eventually to keep this hidden, and I can't do that to them. I'd like to have babies with you too, and get married, and build a real life too. Let's see what else is in here, what's involved, and we'll see whether we should do this or not. Amber is coming back soon too, so maybe she'll know more about it. Come on, let's get this locked up so we can have the guys move it out of here when they come back. No matter what, Sadie, I love you, all right? I don't care if you're human or a vampire, I love you no matter what. I love you too, Seth, she whispered, her voice strangled by the joy filling her throat as she moved to stand under Seth's chin, locked in his arms. She felt his body awakening against her stomach, and wondered how much longer it would be before the men came back from lunch. Looking up at Seth questioningly, she grinned when he winked at her and pushed her out of the room. I'd like to pin you against that large picture window in your bedroom, where anyone that wants to look can see you but can't touch you. I'm not sure I could stand up to do that right now, but I'm sure I can make up for it in other ways. Starting with that lovely old chair you have in your room. The one at just the right height for me to bury my face between your legs until you scream. Oh my, Sadie gasped out as Seth's words created a mental picture for her. She led the way, pulling off the dressing gown she'd thrown on to walk into the sunlit room. She was
censored
beneath it, hoping Seth would find time to take advantage of her nudity during his workday. She didn't care how long the repairs took, as long as he was taking care of her. She stood in front of him as he settled into the chair, and laughed as he pulled her right thigh up on the arm of the chair, opening her to him. She was so happy she couldn't help but laugh. Her laughter settled into moans as Seth's
censored
began to move on her, however. Writhing hips soon followed the moans, and her fingers buried in his hair, holding him in place as she
censored
into his mouth. She was the one talking now, telling him how much she loved him, how much she needed him, the words tapering off to a scream as she came against him. As she settled down, Seth moved, signaling he wanted up, and he took his own clothes off and revealing his gorgeous body to her as she did so. She could stare at him for hours, she thought. I'm going to have to paint this man, though she doubted she'd ever allow anyone to see the full glory of a
censored
Seth.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
6 months later, Sadie and Seth Chetatal walked into their newly restored home, man and wife with a child on the way. The process for returning Sadie to humanity had worked, and she had a fully functioning human body again. Their lives now filled with preparing for their child and focusing on each other. Seth's business was still his, but he spent far more time with Sadie than he did overseeing the business, leaving it to his newly hired supervisor. Amber had returned, relieving their minds about the process, and they had quickly given it a try, the first attempt all they needed to restore Sadie back to life. They married when they found out Sadie was expecting a baby, Sadie's old-fashioned values preventing her from accepting anything less. The couple was happy now, something neither had expected in their old lives. Sadie had expected to spend the rest of her life locked away in her manor home in England, while Seth had expected to work himself into a lonely grave. Together they found a completeness, a oneness that fulfilled them both, and left them utterly wrapped up in each other. They were one, and that was all that mattered to either of them, as they prepared to face each new day together. Thank you for reading my book. If you like this story, I think you'll enjoy my book. Get your free copy of Bearmate now. A big favor to ask. I would really love it if you could take a few seconds to leave me a review. Thank you so much in advance. About the author. Selina Coffey is a romance writer who lives happily in London with her husband and son. She is a hopeless romantic who grew up always believing in love, and she is not ashamed to admit this. It is this belief that makes her so passionate about writing crazy love stories. A stereotypical girly girl, she loves shopping. So whenever she gets a chance and the spare cash, you will probably find her browsing online for the next pair of shoes to add to her collection. You can find her online at www.selinacoffey.com. Contact her at hello@selinacoffey.com. Closing credits. This has been Lucky Vampire. Written by Selina Coffey. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited. Production copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited.